There was always a couple of things that the UK public were going to eventually be, well, turned on to when we left the EU. The first one I often talk about, and that is, of course, trade deals. Why? You look at any other government, any other parliament, any other country around the world that's outside the EU, and trade deals are big sections of politics of what happens in those countries, because they can have a massive effect. And currently, we haven't quite felt those effects yet, but we will, especially the effects of the Australian, the New Zealand trade deals as being part of the Pacific Partnership is going to have massive negative effects on us. We are going to see a lot of consequences because of these fantastic trade deals that the Brexiteers want to sell. But of course, remember, these people are free market fundamentalists. So they really don't care about manufacturing jobs or any type of production here in the UK. So long as they can cheaply import it from elsewhere, doesn't really matter. Of course, what does that mean then for jobs here in the UK? And of course, that will have other knock-on effects. So the other, of course, big one is regulations. And that's the big one we're going to be talking about today. Because today it looks like that we know there's been a lot of, and quite rightfully, attention brought to the fact that UK rivers are being more and more polluted. And this is not a coincidence, because when we left the EU, we left a lot of their environmental protection and regulations that we had to follow. Especially what we lost was inspectors. And that was a key thing that we lost, that was once again not replaced by the government, because, well, they are a government of free market fundamentalists, and they are not interested in regulation or doing anything like that in that way whatsoever. But this, I think, is the first time we are going to see public reaction as to how the public responds to regulation. And this has been that, well, farmers have been able to use a loophole, which has resulted in rivers, particularly one in Herefordshire called the River Wye or the River U. I can't remember how you exactly spell it. It's one of those odd English pronunciations, but yeah, it has unfortunately been polluted. And according to one of the environmental campaigners that we're going to be taking a look at in a moment, or just reading one of their quotes about in the moment, is close to complete ecological collapse. So it's not good, but how the public responds to this, I think, is going to become increasingly more important. So before we do get on into this, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee. And of course, as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel that way. Like I say, down below, again, there's the YouTube thank you button. And of course, there is the Pony Club as well. So what has happened here, and how has this loophole really come to be? Well, initially, this loophole came about in 2018 as the government at the time was, well, gearing up to post-Brexit regulation. And of course, it became part of the big farming reshuffle, because we knew that we were going to lose a lot of the farming regulations. Those were probably going to be the first things that the government had to get in line. So it started first and foremost off with farming regulations. How is this going to affect it? How is this going to affect the environment? And one thing that was heavily lobbied against them, in fact, the National Farmers Union heavily lobbied for the government to essentially apply this loophole. Now, what is essentially happening here? And why is this leading to the pollution of rivers? Well, it all comes down to the spreading of manure. Because if you spread too much manure, when it rains, well, all those nutrients, all those chemicals have got to go somewhere. Where are they going to go? They're going to go straight into the river. That's the first place they are going to go. And this seems to be what is caused this. And it is because the Farmers Union, the National Farmers Union, the NUF, has specifically lobbied for this, and we know about this because we have seen that there's documents. They have had meetings with the environmental agency or DEFRA to lobby for this. And recently, you've had Angela Rayner saying that Labour also wants to bring in new lobby rules, which will help actually stop this kind of thing, or else be also not only stop that, but be more transparent so that ministers have to have these negotiations in open. Just like, well, we had to have them open when we were in the EU, because, like I say, everyone is allowed to see what is going on, what is being discussed. So that, to be honest, a good future Labour regulation down the future. We'll probably get to that discussing later. But this is a clear example of one of the things that I said right at the beginning, that the UK public has never, ever really experienced in our politics something that generally, once again, is a big thing almost everywhere else in the world. It's probably the biggest part of discussions in the EU Parliament, regulation. And now we are having consequences of this, because, to put it purely and simple, you can see exactly what has happened here, that a lobbying group has lobbied for something which has directly led to the pollution of rivers by the fact that farmers have been allowed to overuse manure on field, which has led to there being the excess chemicals on the field. Of course, it rains, all that stuff eventually washes into the river. This is literally, you have done this, it has led to this, it has caused pollution. It has literally gone X, Y, and Z, except it is regulation, over use of manure, led to directly pollution of rivers. And what's even worse about this is that this part of this regulation doesn't even punish the farmers for doing this, so long as they can prove that they are taking reasonable precautions. And to be honest, this reasonable precaution seems to be very much open to interpretation. And, well, you can see what obviously happens. You end up getting a large section of pollution. And of course, I'm going to read the quote from where is he? So this is from Charles Wilson, who's the chairperson from the River Action UK, and this is what he had to say about this. So, that this loophole is why the soils are now overloaded several times above and beyond what it can take. This is cause and effect, black and white. The River Wye has basically turned into green pea soup. It smells, and what used to be beautiful, clean gravel on the riverbed is now covered with green slime. The river is very close to complete ecological collapse. And this has become, or at least I think now will become, front and center in a lot of people's public mind, because a lot of people, of course, going to blame the water companies for what's going on. And don't get me wrong, the water companies do blame, or are to blame for some of the part of the pollution, is what we are finding out, for why our rivers are being so polluted. But it also turns out now, because of, well, loopholes in regulations that the government has done, it has now led to further pollution. And you now have to see why regulation is so important. It's really difficult to get through to people that sometimes regulation, when it's discussed like this, when it's talked about, can be heavily manipulated by lobbyings, certainly by, well, government ministers, because they might have skin in the game. That's why it's so important, as we've seen very recently, that ministers should declare if they have any benefits, or maybe they've have investments in companies. There's a ton of things, to be honest, that Labour could really do to help stop this. We'll see, of course, what they do when they get in power. I'm very, very delighted by some of the stuff Angela Rayner has been saying recently about lobbying rules that Labour wants to bring in. But I think above all, the UK public is going to have to become more and more and more aware of regulations than it used to be. Because now that we're out of the EU, and now that we have specifically a party, the current ruling party is very specifically against regulations of all types, we have to be increasingly on top of any moves, of any changes that they might make. Because, again, to quote the guy from River Action UK, it's cause and effect. You change the rules which allowed this loophole, and it's now causing pollution in UK's rivers, which, in case for one river, is now close to complete ecological collapse. This is why regulation is so important. But the UK public, partly because we've been in the EU, have been, well, not aware of these types of regulations. And it's something that we are going to have to certainly keep a very, very close eye going on in the future. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. Like I say, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. There's a YouTube thank you button, and of course, the Pony Club down below as well. And of course, yesterday was Wednesday, so there was a new Pony Club video out yesterday as well for the Patreon members. So if you are helping support me on one of those, like I say, you have a video there. And of course, if you do want to sign up and join that, like I say, there is a ton of content now. We're out to 50 videos that I have made for that, so there's a ton of content that you can now have access to. So as always, thank you very much for watching, and of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.